Welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of He was a dark mage who sealed by the 12 gods but reborn after 66,666 years to get his revenge. You can watch the previous part on this channel. I put a link in the description below. Let's continue the story. Everyone gathered to welcome the Count and his wife. The Count's wife told the Welton family to make themselves comfortable. One of the Earl's sons frowned and glanced at Jamie, who was asking when his father would arrive. His mother replied that she believed it was closer to midnight. The Earl's family took their seats at their table, and one of the boys asked his father for his opinion on the Earl of Welton's son. The Count questioned why a 10-year-old child interested him so much. His son responded that although they were young now, in the future, the Welton son would become the head of their family. Since they were almost the same age, he suggested they get to know each other. The Count remained silent and thought about rumors he had heard regarding the Welton son's leadership qualities among noble children. While he considered it foolish, he decided to play along a little. He told his son that he was wise beyond his years, which made his son somewhat pleased. The son asked if there was anything else the Count could share about him, but the Count remained silent and suggested they focus on enjoying the party. The son agreed, and they began to eat. The Count's wife touched her son's hand and advised him to get along with the Welton son, as their families had been allies for a long time. The son responded silently, assuring her not to worry. She smiled, satisfied with his response. The son looked at his joyful mother and silently asked for her forgiveness. He glanced at Jamie and contemplated how he had never considered getting along with him. He imagined, believing that Jamie would eventually submit to him. Suddenly, his father's hand resting on his shoulder, expressing that such behavior was expected from his son. He thought that this might help him gain his father's recognition. His brother, who had been observing him, grinned. Some time passed since the event began, and people started to leave their tables. Sears advised Jamie to make friends with everyone, but Jamie thought to himself that he didn't need friends and would spend his time alone wisely. He hoped to find a quiet place to retreat to. He went out to the backyard and discovered a luxurious garden with a gazebo and a greenhouse. He acknowledged that magic wasn't his only asset, realizing that someone of high status had achieved such a level. He wished to meet that person again soon. Suddenly, someone approached and asked who he was talking to. Jamie swiftly stopped and prepared to defend himself, pointing his weapon at the girl's neck. However, he reconsidered and put away his weapon. The girl breathed a sigh of relief and questioned how he could attack so suddenly. In response, Jamie asked if it was possible for someone to sneak up on him unexpectedly. The girl became angry and criticized his rude behavior towards a lady. Jamie retorted that she was fortunate to be alive and she fell silent. Curious about her identity, he asked who she was and how she managed to approach him undetected. The girl smiled and asked if he was interested in her and whether she should disclose her identity or not, considering his previous actions. Jamie found her demeanor unpleasant, and he wasn't in the mood to engage with her, stating that he wasn't interested in starting a conflict. In that very moment, Jamie unleashed his magical powers and cast a spell, shooting a magical projectile through the air, narrowly missing the girl. Startled, she looked at the depression in the ground while Jamie explained that it was an air bullet, a form of second-level magic. He emphasized that if her magical defense was not strong enough, the projectile would be fatal for someone as small as her. Confused by Jamie's actions, the girl wondered what was wrong with him and questioned if he was being serious. Jamie then asked if she still intended to introduce herself. Feeling fearful, the girl quickly confirmed her desire to do so and urged Jamie not to rush her. Responding to her plea, Jamie urged her to be quick before the bullet struck her. Shaken, the girl revealed that her name was Ash Ballet. Jamie inquired about her last name, wondering if she was from the Ballet family, the Viscounts of Ballet County. The girl confirmed his assumption, stating that she was indeed the eldest daughter of the Ballet household and a summoner of spirits. Curious about summoners, Jamie speculated that they were magicians who formed contracts with enigmatic nature spirits. He noted that summoners were considered exceptional magicians and could even claim the title of Baron. Jamie marveled at the fact that despite being the same age as him, Ash had already become a summoner, as most people would begin studying at the age of 10 to connect with nature. Ash expressed relief at having introduced herself and turned the question back to Jamie, asking who he was to wield such dangerous magic. Jamie, interpreting her inquiry as an attempt to interrogate him, hesitated. Given Ash's competitive personality, he believed she disliked losing to others. Responding cautiously, Jamie revealed that he was Jamie Welton, the heir to the Earl of Welton. He expressed pleasure at meeting her. Additionally, Jamie sensed something significant about the Ballet family, noting that they were loyal vassals to the Count. Meanwhile, the Earl of Welton was preoccupied with his own matters. He had captured the leader of Lewin and expressed annoyance at the gang's activities, although he had refrained from harming them thus far. The captured man coughed up blood, and Jamie questioned their involvement in human trafficking. The Count raised his foot and coldly declared that only a madman or someone tired of life would engage in such activities. The man pleaded for mercy, but the Count ignored his pleas and ordered the guards to hang him the next day. As the Count prepared to leave the region, a hooded figure observed from a tree, holding a magical sphere and declaring that the gang had failed. They mentioned preparing for Plan B. Meanwhile, Jamie continued to wander around the garden, with Ash persistently following him. At one point, Jamie abruptly turned around and questioned why she was following him. He pointed out that her father being a vassal of his father didn't automatically justify her actions. Ash cast her gaze downward and expressed her thoughts, but before she could finish, Jamie abruptly cut her off, instructing her to cease speaking in such an odd manner. He then warned her that he was returning and urged her not to trail behind him. In response, Ash grasped his hand, and Jamie, displaying annoyance, questioned if she was being genuine. He turned around and inquired as to why she was persistently bothering him. Ash explained that she had never met someone her own age before and wanted to be friends with him. Jamie was taken aback and wondered why she wanted to be friends. He remained silent, realizing that he had not anticipated this as the reason. He thought that having a servant as a friend would be acceptable, but he couldn't understand why she needed a friend in the first place. He walked away from her, stating that she should find someone else because he didn't need friends. Despite Ash's pleading for him to wait, Jamie continued to depart, prompting Ash to shout, her eyes filled with tears, that Jamie was so mean. Eventually, she left him behind, and Jamie thought to himself that he didn't need friends. He felt that she couldn't comprehend that friendship, like any relationship, wasn't based on rationality. He grew angry and thought negatively about her, as she had triggered an unpleasant memory. Suddenly, someone called out to him, interrupting his thoughts. Jamie turned around and saw the son of the Earl, accompanied by his friends. He noticed that the boy had red hair, identifying him as the son of Count Simon. The boy asked what Jamie called it, surprising his friends. One of the boys questioned the disrespectful tone towards their brother, while another wondered if Jamie even knew who he was. Knowledge that he was Alf, the eldest son and heir of the Earl Simon family. Jamie commented that they were being too noisy. With a smile, he raised his index finger and cast a silencing spell, instantly quieting the group. Alf became nervous and asked if Jamie had used a silencing spell on them. Jamie smiled and asked if Alf was aware of it, suggesting that Alf was slightly more perceptive than the others. Alf responded by calling Jamie a smug idiot and questioned whether he even realized that Jamie was older than him. Jamie dismissed the need for further discussion and urged them to get to the point. Jamie waved his hand dismissively, causing Alf to cough and then put on a smile. Alf explained that he wasn't there to fight, but rather wanted to have a conversation with Jamie. Alf praised Jamie, referring to him as an incredible brother who could use silent spells. Confused, Jamie asked whom Alf was referring to as his brother. Growing tired of the conversation, Jamie told Alf to go his own way. Alf asked if Jamie truly didn't know who he was, to which Jamie confirmed that he was aware that Alf was the son of Earl Simon. This revelation slightly calmed Alf, who expressed disappointment but believed that communication wouldn't be a problem since they would both become core members of the nobility in the eastern region in the future. Alf explained that the reason they had treated Jamie rudely was due to his own brusqueness. Jamie speculated that if he hadn't demonstrated his skills, they would have tried to befriend him by force. Alf reasoned that since they would potentially be influential figures in the future, it would be beneficial to establish friendship now. Jamie found Alf's words evasive and concluded that Alf intended to subdue him. Jamie sighed, considering himself foolish for listening to such pitiful talk, and declared that he had no interest in Alf or his ideas. He didn't want to listen and hoped that was all Alf wanted from him. Alf indignantly asked if Jamie was refusing him, which irritated him. Alf retrieved his magic staff and threatened to crush Jamie's feeble magic mercilessly, leaving Jamie with no choice but to serve him. Alf pointed his staff at Jamie with a smile, awaiting his response. Jamie chuckled and revealed that he had initially planned to resort to brute force. However, he had slightly altered his plan after witnessing Alf's magic. Jamie expressed disgust at Alf's duplicity at such a young age and questioned if he believed that adults would let him have his way. Alf assured Jamie not to worry, as no one would witness their interaction. Alf showed Jamie a pearl and then crushed it, causing the area around them to fill with magic. Jamie inquired if it was a magical artifact of illusion. Alf believed that Jamie truly was a magician if he recognized the artifact and confidently stated that Jamie would soon beg for his life. Alf dispelled the silence, and their friends immediately took in deep breaths, expressing relief. One of the boys remarked that he thought he would die because of Jamie's silencing spell, while another questioned if Jamie felt invincible just because he came from the Welton family. Jamie gazed at the magical dome and admired it as a nice artifact. One of the boys asked if he was deaf and warned him not to expect any mercy from them. Jamie looked at them and commented that he found it all quite interesting. Alf questioned if Jamie realized the gravity of the situation. Before Alf could finish speaking, Jamie cast a spell and instructed them to suffer. The boys began to experience pain, with blood flowing from their eyes and mouths. Jamie warned them not to disable the artifact, raised his index finger to his lips with a smile, and stated that otherwise, everyone would witness their torment in hell. The boys screamed in agony, and after a while, Jamie had already left them as they began to regain their senses. One of the boys asked his brother for help, while another exclaimed that his head felt like it was about to explode. Alf stood up, vomited, and coughed, realizing that he was on the brink of death. He vowed not to forget what had happened and pondered why everything had turned out this way despite being born into a family of knights. Alf questioned how Jamie possessed such magical power if he came from the Welton family, which specialized in swordsmanship. Tearfully, Alf rose to his feet and declared that he wouldn't forgive Jamie, determined to crush his talent and ensure he could never use magic again. The boys returned to the estate, and one of them questioned if Alf's decision was the right one regarding the artifact. Alf dismissed the concerns and instructed the boy to remain silent and follow him. Suddenly, Alf's younger brother, Lennon, called out to him. He looked around the corner and waved. Alf asked why Lennon was there, and Lennon expressed his dissatisfaction with Alf's choice of words, showing him the artifact and questioning how a younger brother could remain calm when his older brother had been offended. Alf was surprised and inquired where Lennon had obtained something so dangerous. Lennon smiled and replied, dismissing the importance of its origin, and urged Alf to go and teach the half-educated Welton a lesson. Lennon handed the artifact to Alf, who agreed, stating that destroying Jamie was much more important. Nightfall, Count Welton arrived and was greeted by Simon, who extended his hand with a smile. Count Welton was delighted and remarked that it was nice to be greeted in person. He shook Simon's hand and asked how he was doing. Simon replied that he was not bad and suggested they move to the reception area. Count Welton asked if the event was a success, and Simon responded that it was the same as always. Count Simon shifts the conversation by mentioning a brief encounter with Count Welton's son. Count Welton questions the authenticity of the meeting, chuckles and asks about the well-being of his little boy. Count Simon, also amused, comments on Count Welton's quick passion and expresses admiration for his deep love for his son. Count Welton responds, affirming that his children give his life purpose. Count Simon envies Count Welton's ability to love something so passionately. Count Welton is about to say something, but Count Simon's sudden silence interrupts him. Count Simon then praises Jamie, Count Welton's son, declaring him a child of remarkable talent and going so far as to describe him as a literal monster. Count Welton falls silent briefly, interpreting Count Simon's words as a diversion from the topic. Count Welton smiles broadly and asks if Jamie also appears gifted in Count Simon's eyes. Count Simon responds with a grin, stating that Jamie isn't just a little gifted but overwhelmingly talented. Count Simon believes Jamie is the most gifted person he has ever met, possibly even in the history of mankind. Count Welton mentions that Count Simon's praise echoes the sentiments expressed by Marquis Rinmal. Curious, Count Simon asks if the Marquis has also seen Jamie, stating that he had been aware of Jamie's gift for quite some time, although he hadn't realized the extent of its uniqueness. As a result, he had approached the Marquis and asked for a favor, believing that Jamie should pursue the path of a mage due to his exceptional magical talent. Knowledge that this choice would be best for Jamie personally and would also benefit the world at large. Reflecting on Count Welton's actions, Count Simon remarked, "It was clever of you to have asked the great mage to be Jamie's teacher. Count Welton chuckled and replied, but even the Marquis declined to take him as his pupil. Count Simon expressed his lack of surprise, mentioning that Jamie, being a genius with unparalleled talent, would develop his skills independently and eventually strive to become a legendary rank 9 mage. Count Simon admitted to feeling a bit envious that Jamie was born with more natural gifts than himself, but at the same time, he expressed his desire to witness the immense power that a mage of such extraordinary potential could attain. The revelation shocked Count Simon, and Count Welton continued, emphasizing the inherent weakness of humanity. Despite their claims of having built a magnificent civilization, Count Welton stated that from a broader perspective, human mages were too vulnerable when compared to dragons, high elves, or lands. Count Simon acknowledged that mankind could barely maintain the delicate balance only thanks to sword masters like Count Welton. Count Welton was left speechless, unable to respond to Count Simon's statements. Curiosity in his voice, Count Simon asked, "What if there were a rank 9 mage?" Count Welton remained silent but appeared visibly nervous, as evidenced by a gulp. Undeterred, Count Simon pressed on, saying, "Even dragons, the most powerful magical creatures, would not look down on us. I strongly wish for humans to be the master race of this world." Count Welton stated his belief that such thinking was arrogance. Count Simon countered, saying, "It is a necessary arrogance. You, Count Welton, know better than anyone else about the history that once existed and was soon forgotten." Count Welton fell into a contemplative silence, his mind consumed by the forgotten history. It was a history known only to a select few throughout the entire continent. Approximately 10,000 years ago, an event took place that wiped out all records preceding that point. The super races, with their advanced knowledge and abilities, chose not to share the secrets of what had transpired with humans. Earl Simon firmly believed that humans must gather enough power to stand against the super races in the event of a conflict. This was necessary to prevent the enigmatic beings from once again annihilating human civilization and erasing their history, just as they had done in the past. Both counts found themselves rendered speechless by the weight of these thoughts. Sensing the need to conclude their conversation, Count Simon suggested that Count Welton should rest. Count Welton replied, wishing him a good night's sleep and expressing the intention to meet again on the following day. Meanwhile, Jamie was sleeping in his bed, and his father approached him, contemplating whether the high expectations placed on his son would be justified. As a father with such a talented child, he worries for Jamie's well-being. He expresses his love and devotion, urging Jamie to grow up to be a fair and honorable person. Morning arrived, and everyone gathered in the banquet hall. Jamie sat in his chair, pondering what was troubling his father the previous night. Of course, he knew he wouldn't use mind control out of mere curiosity, and his abilities hadn't reached that level yet. Suddenly, Ash called out to him, and Jamie, feeling weary, expressed that they had already discussed everything the day before. He wanted nothing to do with her. Ash laughed and insisted that she did have something to discuss. She summoned her sister, leaving Jamie wondering what she was up to. She had decided to increase the number of annoyances. Irritated, Jamie stood up and declared that he was leaving, with no intention of getting involved with them. Ash exclaimed, questioning his departure, suggesting he should at least get to know her since their families were close. Her sister approached Ash and scolded her for being rude. She emphasized the importance of formalities and expressed disapproval of Ash's disrespectful tone towards the Count's son. Ash's sister, Rebecca, is the eldest daughter of the ballet family. Jamie immediately turned around upon hearing Rebecca's voice, and Ash remarked that Jamie himself had given her permission. While Jamie gazed at Rebecca, Ash playfully teased him, suggesting that he was smitten with her sister. She jokingly remarked that it was understandable since Rebecca was a beautiful lady. Jamie, however, spoke the name of the true love in his life, Jane. Jamie gazed at Rebecca and wondered how she ended up there, reminiscing about his beloved who had been sacrificed for her own good. This is where the story of Diablo Wolfir, devoid of emotions, begins. He couldn't have imagined that she would appear before him as a child. Al approached them from the side, identifying Jamie as Jamie Welton. Clenched the pearl in his hand tightly, Alf contemplated that Jamie would face consequences for what he did. In shock, Jamie looked at Rebecca and called her Jane. She asked who Jane was, while Ash inquired if Jamie had truly fallen in love. Al called out to Jamie, declaring that he would now obey him and activated a magical artifact, directing flames towards Jamie. Rebecca cried out to her sister in fear, but Jamie commanded Al not to disturb him. The flames immediately extinguished, leaving Al astounded. The Phoenix Ring, a rank 6 fire magic artifact created by Al's father, was not something a boy like Jamie should have been able to block. Alf's expression turned to one of astonishment as Jamie fixed him with a chilling stare, evidently filled with anger. In a fit of rage, Jamie cast a spell, causing a surge of magic to gather in his palm. Suddenly, ice began to envelop Al's body, causing him to scream in pain. Jamie continued, and Earl Welton swiftly covered his son's face with his hand, stating that it was enough. Jamie quietly called out to his father, who assured him that everything was fine. Jamie glanced at the ballet sisters, and his father confirmed that everyone was safe. Finally, Jamie closed his eyes and rested. In his father's arms, Count Simon approached them, and Count Welton, looking at his son with horror, thought that Jamie was actually going to do it. At first, he considered it a mistake, but it couldn't be categorized as such because if he had failed to stop him, Alf could have died. Count Simon stood in awe, unable to take any action but utter a single word, "Outstanding." As he observed the situation, Simon realized that although Alf's incompetence had diminished the spell's power to about half, the artifact's full potential had been unleashed, posing a threat to incinerate the entire ballroom into ashes. Yet, Jamie effortlessly nullified the danger in an instant, showcasing the potential of a mage who could rival the legendary rank 9 mages. A smirk formed on Simon's face as he acknowledged the splendid and marvelous display. He couldn't help but entertain the thought that Jamie might be the one to fulfill his lifelong dreams. Suddenly, Count Simon's wife called out to him, expressing her concern that Jamie had almost killed their son. Sears intervened and corrected her, stating that the only one who had attempted to kill was Alf, as he attacked Jamie first and used the artifact against him. Madame Simon began to cry and shouted that Alf only wanted a little something. Sears interrupted her and asked what "a little something" meant, urging her to continue. She started screaming, asking if she wasn't allowed to continue speaking. Her husband tried to calm her down, stating that it was enough, but Sears disregarded him and demanded that they explain what her beloved son had done. Madame Simon became frightened and silently pleaded for someone to help her. Count Simon stood in front of them, and she hoped that he would defend their child. However, Count Simon's response was not what she expected. He commented that it seemed like his son had behaved rudely on such an important day and sincerely apologized to Madame Welton. Sears pursed her lips, and whispers filled the hall. Surprisingly, she found his apology to be quite kind, and her anger dissipated. She thanked Count Simon for his apology and mentioned that perhaps she should leave. He agreed and suggested that Argano should also rest. Count Welton concurred, and whispers resumed in the hall. Count Simon apologized to all the guests for spoiling the evening and requested that they return to their chambers and rest well. The ball came to an end, and the guests started to leave. Madame Simon questioned her husband as to why he acted this way, stating that Alf was their son and that he suffered from the actions of this shameless monster. Count Simon glared at her menacingly and told her to be quiet, as there were many extra ears around. He instructed her to return to her place with Alf. Fearfully, his wife called out to him, and they all gathered in their chambers. She exclaimed, asking how he could do this when Alf was their son. Even if he was at fault, Count Simon should have taken his side. Count Simon ignored her and asked his son if he was trying to get his attention. His wife called out to him again, but Alf remained silent. Count Simon grew angrier and demanded that Alf speak up. Alf trembled in fear, and his father asked if he thought his actions would ruin their reputation in the eyes of the Eastern nobles and the entire kingdom. Alf burst into tears and thought about how scared he was, admitting that he just wanted his father to notice him. He looked up at his father and explained that Jamie had been rude to him, which was why he acted out. Count Simon didn't pay much attention to Alf's explanation and asked where he had obtained the Phoenix Ring. Alf didn't answer, and his father expressed his dissatisfaction with having to repeat himself. He warned Alf that he would ask him one last time who had given him the ring. Tears streamed down Alf's face once again, and after a brief pause, he revealed that Lennon had given it to him. Following this revelation, Count Simon summoned his second son for a conversation. Lennon opened the door and questioned if he had been called. Upon seeing his brother, he clenched his teeth in displeasure, thinking about how pathetic he was for creating all the necessary conditions for success, yet still failing. He couldn't believe what an idiot his older brother was, and he knew he had to act dumb. Lennon immediately put on a smile and asked his father if he had summoned him. The Count inquired if Lennon was the one who had given his brother the Phoenix ring. Lennon confirmed his words and his father questioned why he would give something so dangerous to his brother. Lennon stepped aside and explained that Jamie had been bullying his older brother, and as a younger brother, he couldn't stand by and let him suffer. The Count didn't believe him and accused him of manipulating his brother. Lennon became scared, realizing he had been exposed, and wondered how his father had figured it out. Alf overheard this exchange and thought about Lennon. Their father declared that they probably already knew he wasn't interested in them, and he questioned whether they knew why. Despite sharing his blood, they lacked talent. However, that didn't mean he was unaware of their thoughts. If they were so eager for his attention, they should prove themselves worthy of his blood instead of resorting to tricks. He walked towards the door, stating that no matter what they were plotting, he wouldn't interfere anymore, but they needed to resolve the mess by asking Jamie Welton for forgiveness at dawn. He left the room, emphasizing that they would ask for forgiveness until he forgave them. The brothers were left alone, and Alf wondered if he would have to encounter Lennon again. Just the thought made him shake. He turned to his brother and asked if he was going to apologize, but Lennon remained silent. Alf pondered whether their father's words had made him feel worse and questioned why Lennon was silent. Lennon replayed their father's words in his head, and his eyes shone with admiration. He believed that his father would acknowledge him again and vowed to prove that he was worthy of his blood. Meanwhile, Sears approached her sleeping son and observed his face. She realized that the spell Jamie had cast to Alf was really intended to kill him. A wave of curiosity washed over her, wondering what circumstances a mere 9-year-old child like Jamie had endured to drive them to such actions. Initially, she had dismissed it as mere child's play, but now, considering the unleashed power within the artifact, she resolved not to forgive Alf, even in light of Earl Simon's apology. Clenching her fist, she vowed to seek proper recompense, even if it meant harnessing the might of her father's influential lineage. Suddenly, Jamie turned over in his sleep, and his mother's anxiety eased slightly. She rubbed her face with her hands and questioned her own thoughts. Her husband placed his hand on her shoulder and asked if she was all right. She responded softly, looking down at his hand, and asked why something should be wrong. He pulled her closer and asked what he could do for her, assuring her that he would do anything she wanted. She grinned and said that he had already done it. Her husband asked about Alf, mentioning that the guy seemed genuinely scared. Sears giggled and assured everyone that she was feeling fine at that moment. Argano asked if they could leave, as he couldn't rest while they stood there. They exited the room, and Jamie stirred under the covers. He removed the blanket from his head and contemplated the concerns expressed by Sears and Argano. He acknowledged that he couldn't control himself at that moment and sat down, closing his eyes. His thoughts drifted to Jane, considering the possibility that she had been reborn. Jamie found it plausible, given his own reincarnation after thousands of years. He mused on the fact that she didn't recognize him and lacked memories from her past life, which he deemed normal. Jamie considered whether their simultaneous rebirth was a twist of fate or someone's plan, perhaps involving the 12 gods. Suddenly, Chernish, his familiar, nuzzled against his cheek, interrupting his thoughts. Jamie dismissed Chernish's ramblings as nonsense, fearing that if others discovered his true nature, he wouldn't have a peaceful life. He stretched his familiar, Blackie, to the sides and pondered his own thoughts. Jamie's frustration grew as he recollected Jane lying in a pool of blood. Looking away, he resolved to meet her again as his first priority. In an unknown location, a robed man approached a dove and spoke of significant changes coming to the world of magic. He attached a letter to the bird's leg, mentioning Jamie Welton, the eldest son of the Welton family, who was believed to be an incredibly talented magician with at least a 4th-rank wizardry level. The man then released the carrier pigeon and watched it fly away. The next morning, Jamie ventured into a small forest, where white doves flew overhead. He paused, feeling the breeze, and asked his familiar, Little Blackie, if he also needed fresh air. Little Blackie squeaked in displeasure, and Jamie continued, understanding the response. He closed his eyes, remarking on how quiet and pleasant it was in the forest, likely because most people had already left. Jamie mentioned that before he returned, he needed to meet someone. While walking along the path, Jamie suddenly halted upon hearing a dripping sound. He looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound, and decided to use mana to concentrate and find it. He ran towards the source and caught his breath when he saw Rebecca sitting by the water, accompanied by a water elemental. Jamie thought to himself that the elemental might be Andine. Andine noticed Jamie's presence, and Rebecca turned to see who Andine was looking at. When she saw Jamie, she curtsied and asked if he was okay. Jamie confirmed that he was fine and awkwardly inquired about her name. Rebecca smiled and introduced herself as Rebecca Ballet. Jamie couldn't help but notice that both of them were water elemental summoners, which reminded him of Jane's last words about not forgetting her. Rebecca called out to Jamie. Noticing his sad expression, Rebecca inquired about Jamie's well-being, noticing the troubled expression on his face. In that moment, a rush of memories from his past life as Diablo Valfir surged within Jamie. As Rebecca cast a glance towards him, she surmised that something significant must have transpired the previous day, leaving a lasting impact on Jamie. Taking a step closer, Rebecca reached out and embraced Jamie, providing him with comfort and reassurance that everything would be all right. Jamie, amidst the embrace, pondered that this sensation might be nothing more than a lingering echo from his past life. However, he allowed himself to savor it for a while longer, recognizing the potential for enjoyment it held. They then sat down together by the water, and Rebecca asked if he was feeling better. Jamie expressed his gratitude, and Rebecca responded with a smile. She shared that her father had taught her the value of sharing difficulties with someone, making them easier to overcome. Jamie asked if Viscount Ballet, Rebecca's father, had taught her that, and she confirmed his words, expressing regret that they couldn't have a proper conversation the previous day. She was glad for the opportunity they had that day. Jamie agreed, remarking that he had the same thought. Rebecca smiled and asked if it was true. Jamie confirmed her words and thought to himself that she seemed like a completely different person, maybe even for the better. Jamie mentioned that he had heard about their family tradition of making contracts with spirits of the air. Rebecca acknowledged this but explained that she had tried to enter into a contract with them without success. Despite her strong connection with the spirits, they appeared to her but immediately refused to make a contract and left. However, one day, Andine appeared to her and said that it was her destiny to form a contract with her. Rebecca admitted that it was an important decision she should have discussed with her father, but she accidentally signed the contract right away. Jamie reflected on how the Spirit King must have known about the contract with Jane's soul being reborn in Rebecca's body. Rebecca shared that her father wasn't angry but seemed a little upset about it. Jamie remarked that it was still something special, as an elemental appearing to someone and offering a contract independently was unheard of. Although Rebecca couldn't make a contract with the spirit of air, she was chosen by the water elemental. Jamie encouraged her to believe in herself. Rebecca was surprised by his words but then smiled widely and thanked him. Jamie stood up, thanked her for the day, and mentioned that he had to go. He quickly left, and Rebecca said that they would see each other again. She sighed, wishing they could chat more, and blushed as she pondered her feelings. In a sudden recollection, Jamie remembered something important, accompanied by a squeak from Blackie. He had forgotten to inform Rebecca to address him simply as Jamie, instead of using the formal, young master. Blackie let out another questioning squeak, implying curiosity about the situation. Realizing the challenge of approaching Rebecca in a more casual manner, Jamie contemplated the difficulty, possibly due to her mature demeanor. Blackie squeaked once more, seemingly teasing Jamie, to which Jamie responded, rhetorically asking who had asked for Blackie's opinion. Blackie appeared startled by Jamie's reply. After a while, Jamie returned to the estate, where Alf called out to him. Jamie turned around and saw the Simon brothers behind him. Alf awkwardly scratched the back of his head and asked for Jamie's forgiveness. Jamie was surprised and wondered why Alf was suddenly apologizing. He understood everything and asked with a smile if the Count had made him apologize. Alf looked shy and Jamie assured him that everything was clear. Jamie then turned his attention to Lennon, asking why he was there. Alf explained that Lennon was his brother. Jamie asked why Alf had brought him along, suggesting that Alf might have been too scared to apologize himself. Lennon replied that he was the one who gave his brother the artifact. Jamie's anger began to rise, and he questioned if the Simon brothers wanted to kill him together. Lennon replied with a smile, introducing himself as Lennon Simon. Jamie's eyes sparkled as he observed Lennon's aura and recognized his talent, realizing that Lennon surpassed Alf in comparison. It seemed that even having such a son wasn't enough for the Count. Lennon mentioned that nothing terrible had happened since he heard their apology, wondering if they could be free now. Jamie smiled irritably and thought to himself if Lennon took him for a fool. He hadn't shown up the previous day, making everything seem like trash to him except his father. If Jamie let him go now, it would surely come back to haunt him. He sighed and asked Alf if it would be difficult for him in the fight for the inheritance. Alf exclaimed, expressing confusion about what Jamie was talking about. Jamie looked at Lennon and asked if he was speaking the truth. Lennon grew scared, and Jamie reassured him that it didn't concern him. Jamie placed his hand on Lennon's shoulder and stated that if Lennon was responsible for everything, he should face the consequences. Jamie used his magic, and Lennon asked what he was doing. Suddenly, Lennon fell silent, realizing that there was nothing around him. He felt a chilling coldness and began to rub his palms, fearing he was about to freeze. Falling to his knees, he heard a voice saying that this was his last chance. The darkness lifted, and Lennon realized it was all an illusion. He clutched his head, sobbing in fear, while Alf called out to him in concern. Lennon started crying and believed that he knew one thing for sure. He looked at Jamie, thinking that this was his last opportunity and that he should beg for forgiveness. Trembling with fear, Lennon came to a realization that it was crucial for him to humble himself in that moment and offer a sincere apology. Though struggling to find his voice, he managed to utter a single word, imploring for forgiveness. The day of departure arrived, and the carriages were ready at the estate. Jamie stepped out onto the street, thinking that they were finally going home. He was exhausted from going out, and he longed to be embraced by his mother and stay at home. Shaking his head, he smiled and pondered his previous thoughts. Count Simon approached Jamie, remarking that he seemed to be in a good mood. Jamie turned around and replied with a smile that it wasn't that good, but he was simply glad to be returning home soon. The Count smiled and expressed regret that he never had the chance to communicate with Jamie. Jamie returned the smile, saying that he hoped so too and shared his feelings. The Count suggested that Jamie could stay if he wished. Jamie disagreed, emphasizing his strong desire to go home quickly due to his exhaustion. The Count was momentarily taken aback but then smiled and laughed, stating that everything Jamie said was true. The magical world had begun to observe him. Jamie responded with something expected, and the Count laughed again, mentioning that he apparently knew who Jamie was. They went for a walk, and Jamie asked if he wasn't mistaken and if the Count's son's name was Lennon. Jamie implied that he had taught Lennon a lesson. The Count replied that he thought so, as Lennon had not been himself since yesterday. Jamie looked at the Count with concern and asked if he was angry about it. The Count responded that these were the consequences of their decisions and questioned why he should be angry. Jamie realized that he now understood what was wrong with the Simon brothers. He remarked that Lennon appeared to possess considerable talent, suggesting that he should be trained. However, the Count disagreed, asserting that he knew more about Lennon's abilities than anyone else. He dismissed Jamie's suggestion, stating that it held no value. Jamie smiled nervously and expressed that if he didn't make an attempt, he would never know if Lennon could reach his level. He argued that Lennon wouldn't be able to showcase his talent under such pressure. Pointing his finger at Count Simon, Jamie blamed him for the situation, claiming that it was all his fault. The Count was surprised by Jamie's words, and Jamie continued to explain that the Simon brothers had become the way they were because the Count failed to recognize their talents. Perplexed, the Count asked what Jamie was referring to. Jamie clarified that while Alf was ordinary, Lennon possessed great potential. Simon expressed his thoughts, remarking how Jamie had casually mentioned that he didn't recognize Lennon's talent. In response, Jamie simply smiled, which left Simon pondering how a young child like Jamie could possess such unwavering confidence in his son's potential. Simon found it intriguing, as conversing with Jamie felt akin to speaking with a mage of extraordinary power, someone truly incomparable. Jamie suggested that by helping his son, the Count might surpass himself. The Count was surprised once again and was about to ask something, but Sears called out to her son, announcing that they were ready to depart. Jamie turned around, waved his hand dismissively at the Count, and advised him not to give importance to the words of a foolish child. He quickly entered the carriage, leaving the Count behind. As Jamie ran into the carriage, the Count's eyes sparkled. He closed his eyes and muttered that things were going as expected. It had been a while since the ball at Count Simon's estate. Jamie stood in a clearing in the forest, leaning against a stone, waiting for someone. Blackie looked around, and suddenly, Jamie noticed something to the side and alerted Riza and Azard to hurry. Riza and Azard emerged from the bushes, and Jamie asked them displeased where they had been. Riza explained that Azard had been idle, causing them to be late. Azard apologized, but Jamie told them to forget about it and urged them to share what they had learned. Riza revealed that the Zenith Church had been engaging in charitable work in Hayes, providing food and shelter to those in need. They had created a positive impression by serving the poor and preaching the will of God. Initially, the civilians didn't pay much attention, but as the church's activities continued, people began to rely on them and eventually became believers. The Zenith Church's position in Hayes had risen significantly. Jamie asked when they had started these actions, growing concerned, and stated that the fool Zenith would never engage in charity work. He called his subordinates and inquired if they believed that war and peace could coexist. After a brief exchange, they agreed that it was not possible. A sudden thought occurred to Riza, and he suggested that perhaps they were connected. Jamie agreed, explaining that this was the essence of Zenith. He believed that the world was like a hill covered in corpses, with war being the manifestation of Zenith's divinity. Consequently, he suspected that there was something hidden beneath the church's nobility, and they needed to uncover it. Riza and Azard assured Jamie that they would accomplish the task. Jamie thought that he would definitely uncover Zenith's plans. As time passed and morning arrived, Ricky found himself in the shelter of the Zenith Church. The priest praised Ricky, stating that compared to begging and constant beatings, this was paradise. Ricky reflected on the past month and a half spent in the shelter and felt grateful for the refuge it provided for him and his sister. Ricky's sister, who was blind, asked if it was Ricky who had returned to the room. Ricky confirmed it and thought about the hardships they had faced, including their parents abandoning them. They had endured a difficult life on the streets, with no help from others. However, the Zenith Church had extended a helping hand to them, giving them a second chance. Ricky aspired to become a priest and spread the miracles he had experienced. As they went outside with others, a guy approached them and asked if they had heard about Shino. Ricky inquired what they were supposed to hear, and the guy explained that Shino had received a divine blessing and would become a priest the following week. Ricky was surprised by the news and wondered if he, too, would become a priest. Time passed, and Jamie flew over the city at night, informing Blackie that they were almost at their destination. Descending, he noticed a blonde young man lying on the road. Jamie landed nearby and questioned the young man's condition, wondering if he was a priest due to the divine power emanating from him. Observing the blade on the young man's belt, Jamie found it troublesome and contemplated ending his life. However, the young man grabbed Jamie's leg, startling him. The exhausted young man tried to say something, but Jamie couldn't understand him properly. The young man mentioned that he was hungry before losing consciousness. Jamie hesitated, thinking it might be better to leave him there to starve, but ultimately decided to leave and instructed Blackie to follow. The next morning, Jamie joined breakfast and was surprised to see the fair-haired young man present. The young man took a bite of his bun and recognized Jamie as he introduced himself. Jamie wondered why this unpleasant individual was eating at the same table. The young man chuckled and expressed gratitude for Count's help, mentioning that he would have died of hunger on the streets if not for the guards who brought him to the shelter. Count dismissed any merit on his part, attributing the young man's rescue to the guards. The young man acknowledged that it was an unusual case for a knight of light to die of hunger, but emphasized that they were still human and could endure longer due to their high rank. Jamie started feeding strawberries to his sister and felt uneasy about their situation. He wondered why his parents were treating him so well. The Count asked if he served the Church of Pero, to which the young man replied that he served Pero, the goddess of mercy and punishment. The Count turned to his wife and asked if she was surprised when she heard about it. She confirmed her surprise, and the young man questioned why there was something wrong with it. She asked if he had heard of Bishop Sephir, and he inquired if she was from Aton. She replied affirmatively, stating that she was from the Bell family. This revelation surprised the young man, who then rose from his chair and knelt before her, greeting her respectfully. Jamie was taken aback and wondered what was happening. He knew that the Pero Church was located in Aton, where the Bell family resided, but he didn't think that alone warranted such a display of respect. He called out to his parents, and his father asked what the matter was. Jamie, with a smile, questioned why the man had greeted his mother in such a manner, feeling like he was being forced to act like a 9-year-old. The Count laughed it off and said it was a long story that he might tell another time. Jamie became upset and sarcastically remarked that it was great. He thought that even after such humiliation, the man hadn't told him anything. His sister waved at him and called him cute, but Jamie didn't believe it had worked. He thought that if the Bell family's close ties with the Pero Church were true, it could become a problem because he would eventually have to kill her. Time passed, and the Count and the young man entered the living room. Asked how the young man ended up there, considering that the Pero Church had no business in the eastern region. He questioned if the young man was there to expand his influence. The young man nervously waved his hands and replied that he was and somehow ended up there. The Count asked if he was following someone, and the young man sighed and admitted that he was pursuing someone who was conducting unthinkable and cruel experiments that should not be done. He was chasing the creator of the chimeras. Ardeno exclaimed, asking if the young man was claiming that the creator of the chimeras was in haze and questioned who he was. The young man pursed his lips and remained silent, asking for forgiveness and explaining that the rest of the information was so secret that not everyone within the church knew about it. He couldn't discuss it with anyone, but he promised to share it with Jamie if he listened to his request, and they made a contract. The Count asked if he was asking for help, and the young man confirmed, stating that if Jamie, as a swordmaster, helped him, it would greatly aid their cause. Ardeno contemplated the creator of chimeras and mentioned that they were treated worse than ordinary criminals because chimeras were based on humans. While there might be those who didn't use humans to create them, there were no known precedents in history. He stated that he couldn't promise full support, but, knowing about the family's relationship with the Pero Church, he couldn't turn a blind eye to it. The young man expressed his joy and asked if this meant the Count would help him. With a smile, the Count confirmed his assistance, prompting the young man to happily jump up from the sofa and thank him. Ardeno advised him to stop being overly nice and inquired about why the church was persecuting the creators of chimeras. He also questioned why they didn't seek help from the kingdom. The young man averted his gaze and explained that while the kingdom would likely offer assistance, it would greatly undermine the authority of the church in this particular case. He revealed that the creator of the chimeras, who was being pursued by the church, had kidnapped over 10 goddess knights. This revelation made the Count nervous. As he realized the severity of the situation, the young man further disclosed that the creator had developed chimeras capable of using divine powers. Meanwhile, Jamie strolled through the garden and found himself eagerly anticipating tea time. As he approached the gazebo, his mother asked if the person he was waiting for had arrived, and she quickly seated him at the table. After pouring him tea, she inquired about what he was so curious to know. Jamie replied that he wanted to understand why the young man had shown such solemn respect to his mother, someone he had never seen before. Smiling, his mother acknowledged his curiosity and revealed that her own grandfather, who Jamie had never met, was the savior of the Pero Church. This ancestor had aided the church when a crucial item was stolen, preventing the followers of the Demon King from summoning their lord. Jamie was surprised to learn about his mother's family connection to the church and wondered if her grandfather's actions were the reason why their family was granted the title of archbishop by the Pero Church. His mother explained that it was a reward for their ancestors' sacrifice, and for the next 100 years, the family's head would hold the rank of bishop. Jamie now understood the reason behind his mother's sadness and contemplated their family's position within the church. He couldn't help but think of how he would eventually use this connection to his advantage in seeking revenge against the creator of the chimeras. However, for now, he decided to make the most of the situation and enjoy the tea with his mother. Later that night, someone announced that their younger brother, Shino, who had been chosen by their father Zenith, would be leaving home. They all offered their blessings for his upcoming journey and raised a glass in celebration. Ricky happily thought about Shino finally going to Mount Channon. Sometime later, Shino sat in the carriage and called out to Ricky and Anna, expressing his gratitude for seeing him off. Ricky mentioned that the priest had informed him that he would also be sent away soon, so they might not have to endure the loneliness of being apart for too long. Shino smiles and assures everyone that he won't cry, stating that he will go to his destination first and wait for them to join him soon. As the coachman signals the horses, they start riding away from their current location. Ricky loudly advises Shino to take care of himself, smiles and contemplates his future as a priest. After some time, the carriage comes to a stop near a building, and the priest informs Shino that they have arrived. Shino is surprised and asks if they are already at the correct place. Looking out the window, he wonders if this is Mount Chongan, expressing concern that the cart couldn't have traveled such a long distance. He questions the priest if they have reached the main branch of the Pero Church. The priest reassures him that everything is fine and instructs him to follow. The priest then retrieves a book and activates a mechanism that opens a hidden passage. He tells Shino that they must now go down, but Shino hesitates, expressing his belief that they are in the wrong place. Shino follows the priest, calling out to him, and expresses his apprehension about the strange place they are in. Suddenly, a mutilated human hand emerges from an open door, causing Shino to become frightened and seek refuge with the priest. Shino describes the place as strange and unsettling. The priest removes his hood, revealing himself as the bishop, and smiles as he observes Shino. Shino is surprised and asks if the bishop just called himself a bishop. He kneels down and questions why he is in such a terrible place instead of Mount Chongan, wondering if it's because he was chosen by God. The bishop affirms that Shino is indeed the chosen one and explains that they are in this place because it represents their utopia. The bishop expresses his desire to witness the transformation of such a pure and innocent child and insists that Shino must be there. At that moment, a man with abnormal growths on his body approaches them, stating that they are now worthy experimental subjects and that Shino will become a beautiful chimera. Shino is overcome with fear as the man reaches out his hand towards him. Sometime later, in the lands of the Earl of Welton, on Hay Felbar Street, Jamie remarks that they are on Fela Street, the largest street in Hayes. He recalls the difficult night when he was starving in this very place. Argano suggests that the reason Jamie is showing him the city is because their child is very intelligent. The knight remarks that it would be impressive if their child could become a part of the city's administration or even higher positions. Reflecting on his current state, Jamie walks with an angry expression, feeling unlucky and as if someone has cursed him. The knight finds it intriguing that a 9-year-old boy possesses such stamina and a developed memory, suggesting that he could hold a position of authority. The knight calls Jamie's name, expressing gratitude and stating that thanks to him, he was able to explore the city of Hayes. Jamie replies that he hasn't left the house in a while, so he also enjoyed the experience. The knight reaches out his hand to Jamie and suggests that they can return now that they are done with their task. Jamie declines the offer to hold his hand and instead asks if he can ask him something. This surprises and upsets the knight, who responds by saying that of course Jamie can ask his question. Jamie then asks what he and his dad talked about the previous day. The knight is taken aback by the sudden question and wonders why Jamie is asking about that. He had expected Jamie to ask something like if it's cool to be a holy knight. The knight admits that they talked about how handsome Jamie is and how handsome he will be when he grows up. However, Jamie looks angry and accuses the knight of deceiving him. Embarrassed, the knight wonders if boys his age don't like hearing compliments. He insists that he was not lying and that they genuinely talked about Jamie because his father loves him very much. Jamie expresses his disbelief and states that even children wouldn't believe such a story. The knight laughs, apologizes, and admits that he did deceive Jamie, but explains that it's something only adults can understand and he can't disclose the details to Jamie. Jamie turns around and thinks that something is definitely happening in Hayes, which is why he asked the knight to show him the city. Concerned, the knight asks if Jamie is angry. Ignoring him, Jamie wonders what could be wrong. The knight becomes worried and asks what he should do as he realizes that Jamie was indeed offended. Then, Jamie remembers something and says that he forgot to show him one more place. Surprised, the knight asks about the place, and Jamie reveals that it's the Zenith church in Hayes. Later, as they arrive at the church, the knight asks if Jamie is no longer angry. Jamie responds that they have reached the right place and reiterates that he is not mad. At that moment, Ricky, who is sweeping the floor at the entrance of the church, notices them. The knight looks around and comments that this is how it is. Ricky is surprised to see Jamie and recognizes him as the guy with black hair. The knight asks if Ricky is Jamie's friend, as it seems like he is looking at him. Jamie denies this and claims that it's his first time seeing Ricky. He adds that changing his hair color didn't seem to help him go unrecognized. Ricky questions why Jamie is acting as if they don't know each other. Meanwhile, a carriage approaches them at high speed. Ricky runs towards Jamie and asks if he dyed his hair because he could hardly recognize him. They both turn around and notice the carriage rapidly approaching. The coachman becomes frightened and tells Ricky to get out of the way. The knight and Jamie are taken aback by the situation and the horse's attempts to stop. The knight immediately starts running to save Ricky and shouts loudly. Ricky gets scared and starts crying, while looking at the horses in front of him, realizing that he won't be able to move in time. The knight is surprised when he notices something, and Ricky continues crying, asking if he's going to die. Jamie witnesses this and unleashes his energy, utilizing his chain field skill. He quickly creates a magic circle and releases chains made of magical energy. The chains manage to delay the horses, allowing the knight to save Ricky by moving out of the way. They turn around and see the chains stopping the carriage and horses. Ricky, filled with fear and shock, asks in disbelief if he is still alive. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Ricky embraces Jamie tightly and thanks him. However, Jamie becomes angry and insists that Ricky let go of him because he is strong and can't bear his weight any longer. Observing the scene, the knight realizes that Jamie's magic, used to save Ricky, is remarkably powerful for someone his age. Ricky refuses to release his grip, expressing his deep appreciation and considering Jamie his savior. Jamie tries to free himself from Ricky's embrace, complaining about his weight. The knight recognizes Jamie's exceptional talent and predicts that he will become even more formidable in the future. Jamie questions why he stood up as if he had been buried, prompting the knight to inquire where they are headed. Jamie wonders why the knight is asking such a question and reminds him that they need to go to Zenith Church. The knight agrees but questions whether he is overthinking things and underestimating Jamie. They follow Ricky, who exclaims his excitement about going to the Zenith Church and mentions that it serves as a shelter for children like him, who have nowhere else to go. Ricky notices an elderly woman and addresses her as sister. Intrigued, she asks where he has been and who these people are. The knight and Jamie catch her attention, and Ricky approaches her, recounting how a fast carriage was headed straight towards him, and they came to his rescue. Ricky introduces them as his saviors. The elderly woman expresses surprise and concern for Ricky, grateful that he escaped a terrible fate. The knight humbly states that it is their duty as servants of Pero. The elderly woman is taken aback to learn that the knight is affiliated with the Pero Church. The knight points to Jamie and admits that he contributed much more to the rescue. Jamie feels embarrassed and believes the knight's comment was unnecessary. The elderly woman is about to say something about Jamie, but the knight interjects, mentioning that Jamie is the son of the local ruler. Jamie provides his full name, and the elderly woman acknowledges that she should have recognized him immediately based on his emerald hair. Jamie wonders about her peculiar reaction, considering that she was born in the city of Hayes. He questions whether she is hiding something. The elderly woman asks if they have come to take Ricky back home. The knight explains that they came because they heard about the Zenith Church's presence in the area. The elderly woman departs, indicating that they should follow her, and suggests Ricky give the young master a tour. Ricky is surprised by this request and asks if he really needs to show them around. Jamie wonders if she is trying to separate them and worries that she may intend to harm Ricky. In response, Jamie mentions that he will forget about having dinner with his parents in the evening, implying that they will meet again later. The knight is taken aback by Jamie's statement but smiles and agrees that they will see each other later. Ricky, feeling shy, mentions that there is a dining room in the direction they are heading, as it is part of the orphanage where he lives. Jamie suggests dropping the formalities because he finds them ridiculous and doesn't care about such protocols. He assures Ricky that they can continue treating each other as before. Ricky is surprised by this and asks if Jamie is serious. He insists that Ricky should follow him as he will show him everything there is to see. Jamie wonders why Ricky is so happy, finding it difficult to understand. After some time, Ricky mentions that he has shown Jamie almost everything and reveals that he lives with his sister. Jamie dismisses the idea, claiming that he hasn't even thought about it. Ricky opens the door and introduces Jamie to Anna, referring to him as a friend. Jamie is taken aback, questioning who said they were friends. Anna begins to get up and asks Ricky if what he said is true. Jamie is surprised to see her and Ricky assists his sister, suggesting that she greet Jamie. Anna greets Jamie and reveals her name. Ricky looks at Jamie and asks if something is wrong. Jamie remains in shock, contemplating the situation and wondering if Anna possesses a holy essence. He is particularly surprised by her eyes, which seem to be filled with holy power. Jamie deduces that representatives of God on earth are servants endowed with divine power, and Anna appears to have such power. He ponders whether she could potentially cause problems in the future and considers the possibility of killing her to prevent that. However, he realizes that killing her now would be even more dangerous. Ricky is about to ask Jamie something and calls him, questioning with a smile if he has fallen in love with his sister. Jamie is taken aback by the question and asks what nonsense Ricky is talking about. Ricky explains that his sister is still young, but before he can finish, Anna hits him on the head and expresses her desire to ask Jamie something. She masks her anger and explains that there is something she finds incomprehensible in a book and asks for Jamie's help. Ricky assures her that he will assist Jamie. Anna accidentally hits Ricky with the corner of the book, and they all sit down together on the bed. Jamie observes them and wonders whose holy power Anna possesses, acknowledging the need to keep an eye on them. Ricky explains that he was heading towards a distant high tower where he believed no one could find him. Anna interjects, stating that she was aware of the tower and clarifies that it is not a cave but an actual tower. Jamie, about to leave, contemplates whether he should depart. Ricky notices Jamie's intention and asks if he is going to the restroom. Jamie denies this and confirms that he is indeed leaving. He gets out of bed and mentions that he will walk Jamie to the exit. He assures Anna that he will return soon and accompanies Jamie to the exit. Along the way, Ricky asks if Jamie will come to visit them again. Jamie remains silent, thinking to himself that Ricky never seemed to stop talking. He then asked Ricky what he aspired to be when he grew up. Ricky, curious about the question, expressed his gratitude for Jamie's interest in getting to know him better. Jamie appeared somewhat melancholic and stated that he was merely imagining things. With a smile, Ricky mentioned that initially, he didn't have any further aspirations after finding a place to stay with Anna. However, as time went on, he discovered that he did indeed have a dream. Ricky beamed as he shared his wish to receive the calling and become a priest of the Lord God Zenith. Ricky revealed that a friend from the orphanage had been chosen and had left for the headquarters the previous night. He expressed his envy, noting that he had never been more jealous in his life. Jamie was taken aback by this revelation, surprised to hear that someone had been chosen and sent to the headquarters. In a sudden realization, the ideas of the Order, human trafficking, the rebel, and the calling started to connect in Jamie's mind, causing him to feel agitated. He immediately asked Ricky about his whereabouts before being accepted by the orphanage. Ricky hesitated and then replied that he had been on the streets. Jamie exclaimed, rejecting that answer. Ricky flinched but finally admitted that he had been doing chores and running errands for the rebel. Ricky questioned why Jamie was so interested in hearing about that place. Jamie realized that this was it. He knew that the Zenith organization was involved in something nefarious and dirty.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button for more content. Feel free to leave a comment down below sharing your thoughts or suggestions. If you want to stay updated on all our latest uploads, click the notification bell icon. And hey, why not check out some of our other videos popping up on the screen right now? If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by liking, sharing, and subscribing. It really means a lot. Peace.